Why do the evil people in this world, the liars, cheaters, and swindlers, so often succeed? I've come to the conclusion that the real reason lies in the rest of us. Most of us who live on this planet are basically honest and mostly decent. We tend to tell the truth in most situations and treat each other with some kindness. It's no surprise that we also take it for granted that those around us will behave the same way. But our assumption that most people are honest leaves us terribly vulnerable to those who lie and cheat without a twinge of conscience. They can deceive us for quite a long time, sometimes forever, and we don't even notice it. Because we don't lie or cheat, we don't suspect quickly enough that others might be doing this to us. It was Gina Ganatopoulos who taught me this painful lesson. Or maybe I should say Gina Ganatopoulos McMillan, because that's her married name. I'm Alex McMillan, her ex-husband. One morning, the engine of my Lexus started making terrible noises, so I left the car at Marshall Motors, where Dominic had been working on my cars for about 10 years. He called me around lunchtime, but instead of saying the car was fine, he said, "You better come here and talk to me." When I arrived, he led me to a private office at the back of the building. "Alex, the engine is fine, the belt is just loose." But there was something else. He looked at me seriously. Someone tampered with the brake line. There was enough hydraulic fluid left for a normal stop, but if you had to go down a steep hill or stop in a hurry, you would have crashed the car. I stared at him with my mouth open, my mind racing. 6 months earlier, Gina and I had moved into a new, modern house in the suburbs. It was magnificent, with cathedral ceilings and lots of glass. The house was surrounded by a tranquil forest, but it was also at the end of a cul-de-sac on a cackle. If I had driven home that evening, I would almost certainly have been killed. After a couple of minutes, I collected my thoughts. "Dominic, do me a favor, okay? Don't tell anyone about this yet. Have you fixed everything?" "No, old man," he replied. "A crime was committed here, or at least an attempt. I have to call the police." "Fine," I said, thinking quickly. "How about we do this, take some photos of the brake line and write it down as if it were for the police, but let's not call them yet. Just leave the car parked in the back lot, and I'll borrow one of those jalopies you keep for a few days." I paused, thinking about the property. "There are surveillance cameras on the property, right?" "Yes," Dominic answered, but he looked doubtful. "That's the problem," I continued. "Whoever did this will want to cover their tracks when they find out that I'm not dead. So I'm betting they'll try to steal the car from the lot in the next few nights. I don't want to call the police until this happens. Then we will have a recording from the camera, which we will give to them." 45 minutes later, I stepped out of my rented blue Corolla and parked it in the driveway. I took the whole day off, needing time to think carefully about what was happening. The attempt on my life had to be connected with money. I was the president and co-founder of AICHI, a $6.8 billion Silicon Valley software company. My first instinct was that someone wanted to get me out of the way as part of an attack on the company. It was a day off for Carmelita, our cook and housekeeper, who usually worked from noon to 8 in the evening, so the house was quiet. Gina must have gone shopping or was playing tennis. I walked aimlessly around the house, turning over possible culprits and reasons for what was happening in my mind. I picked up the phone and called Jeff Denham, an old friend who runs a security firm that AICHI uses. Without explaining the reasons, I made it clear that I suspected some kind of problem, either financial irregularities already occurring or a future attack on the company. We agreed that his financial specialist would conduct a full audit of our computers and financial records. I gave Jeff a temporary password that would allow his people to access everything they needed from the desktop in my office, and told him I wanted it done discreetly. We'd tell everyone they were doing a routine check. After I finished talking with Jeff, I called Meredith, my longtime secretary, and told her to enter a temporary password into my computer, explaining that Jeff's guys would be over later in the day. Having finished this, I resumed my aimless wanderings. I wandered over to our home computer and poked around, not expecting to find anything. Out of pure idle curiosity, I tried to open some of Gina's files, including her email, and to my surprise, they were all password protected. What could Gina have on her computer that she wouldn't want me to see? Short of something unlikely like planning a surprise party, I couldn't imagine it. I made a mental note to ask her about it later. I was drinking tea in the kitchen at about 4:30 p.m. when Gina came in. She looked at me and practically fell over. I had never seen anything like it. Her mouth opened, she turned white, and her body pressed against the door frame. "Alex, what are you doing here?" I smiled softly. "Actually, honey, I live here. Do you remember?" She pulled herself together a little and sat down at the table opposite me, forcing a smile. "Of course, baby. It's just, well, you're almost never home this early, and I didn't see your car outside." Everything happened in an instant. I was about to tell her all about the brake line, but instead I just said there was a problem with the engine and I had to leave it with Dominic for a few days. He rented me one of their jalopies, the one in the driveway. Why didn't I tell her the truth at the time? I think I thought it was because I didn't want to worry her. I didn't want to say, by the way, honey, someone's trying to kill me. Why scare your wife? But when I thought about it later, it turned out that the reason was completely different. Why was she so shocked to see me sitting in the kitchen? Not just surprised, but stunned, as if it was the most unexpected thing in the world. I didn't understand her reaction, and the more I thought about it later, the more it gnawed at me. Oh, she said, and I saw how she was trying to pull herself together. Well, it's great that you returned home so early. What do you want to do for dinner? Maybe we can go somewhere since Carmelita left. Great, she said. Just let me take a shower, and maybe we can go to the Andante. Then she quickly walked out of the room, and after a couple of minutes I heard the shower running. I put my cup in the sink and headed to the bedroom, thinking I'd wash my face and change into something more casual before we headed out. The bedroom door was almost closed, and to my surprise, as I approached, I heard Gina talking on the phone in a low, urgent voice. Why did she have to turn on the shower and then call someone? I didn't hear the call itself. I didn't hear anything special, just, "No, Dwayne, I have no idea." "No, of course not." "Yes, we'll have to." "Okay, baby. Bye." Not much, but more than enough to make me freeze in place. She was talking to Jeff Denham, my friend and security guru. His middle name was Dwayne, and I'd called him Dwayne since about the 8th grade. Gina took the nickname from me. There was no doubt who was on the other end of the line. I waited until she hung up and headed to the bathroom. I then waited another 2 minutes before entering the bedroom and changing clothes. I washed my face in the guest bathroom so as not to disturb Gina's shower. My head was going through the motions. What the hell is going on? Could Gina and my friend Jeff have been involved in what happened to my car? Despite the evidence of the last 10 minutes, it seemed completely impossible. Gina and I had been married for 8 years. I was 46 and she was 37. I had already been married and divorced once. I had 2 wonderful children whom I only saw during the summer holidays and visited occasionally because, after the divorce, their mother moved them 2,000 miles away. I first met Gina when she was touring the Apex offices while working as a sales representative for a computer support firm we worked with. I tried to find out who she was and then arranged a lunch date with a friend from her group who could introduce us casually. It was worth the effort. Even if you woke her up from a sound sleep, Gina would be one of the 10 most beautiful women you have ever seen. And when she had time to put on clothes and makeup, she was simply stunning. She was almost 178 cm tall with long raven black hair and dark eyes, high cheekbones, and a toned, athletic body. She also had a look, a way of walking, moving, presenting herself, looking into the eyes that said, "I know I'm nice, and I know you think so too." From the very first time I became interested in her, I realized that I would have a lot of competition, and it was a pleasant surprise that we were soon dating, and then dating seriously. About a year later, we were engaged to get married. I'm good looking but not handsome, and I'm 9 years older than Gina. I knew that my success in business and my money had to be part of the attraction for her, and that didn't bother me. Why be successful if it doesn't help you get your foot in the door with gorgeous women? Plus, we had an ironclad prenup that limited her to no more than $1 million if we divorced in less than 20 years, so I was sure she loved me as much as she loved my money. We lived very well together, and if she liked being rich with me, that's great as long as she made me happy too. Gina made me very happy. She spent a lot of money, but I had it, so it wasn't a problem. She was energetic and lively, very outgoing, and full of fun. She made a lot of friends, took me to a lot of parties, and flirted with a lot of guys. But at the end of the evening, she came home with me and usually didn't leave me alone. Gina was experienced and enthusiastic, as adventurous in bed as she was anywhere else. She loved hang gliding, rock climbing, and the like. She exhausted me, and I was completely happy about it. But the events of the last few hours changed everything, or at least threatened to change everything. I had to think twice about it, primarily because Denham seemed to be involved. Under other circumstances, he would have been the first person I called. In fact, I already called him and asked his people to start reviewing Apex's finances. I now realized that perhaps I had made the wrong move in warning him that I was suspicious. Thank God I didn't mention the car was tampered with. Neither he nor Gina knew that I knew about it, at least not yet. That evening, I tested my acting skills to the limit. Gina and I went to the Andante and had a nice dinner and a bottle of good wine. I was incredibly anxious but tried my best not to appear withdrawn or distant. I tried to keep the conversation going as usual. I knew that the evening would end with a workout in bed, as was Gina's habit after a pleasant dinner with good wine, and I wondered what to do. But the right decision was obviously to go with the flow, not only because I didn't want to arouse any suspicion in her, but also because intimacy with my wife was the most enjoyable thing I've ever experienced. Suspicion or not, I was going to enjoy her at least one more time. We didn't do anything unusual for us. When she came out of the bathroom in a short red nightie, I was waiting for her in bed, and then we made love. It was amazing. We hugged for a few minutes, said wow and I love you, and went to sleep. An exciting but typical romp in bed after a pleasant but typical dinner, nothing unusual, or so it seemed. One of my talents is the ability to think about a problem in part of my mind while doing other things, like having dinner with my wife or making love to her. So when I got up the next morning, I knew exactly what I would do to get to the bottom of the mysterious attempt on my life and the obvious involvement of my wife. I woke up early and got busy preparing for a quick trip to Los Angeles. I packed an overnight bag, asked the company travel agent to book me the usual 3-day round-trip flight and a room at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where I always stayed in Los Angeles. I called a limousine to the airport, ate a quick breakfast, then went into the bedroom and woke Gina. "Baby, sorry for bothering you," I smiled at her and enjoyed the sight of her beautiful face as her eyes slowly opened and she smiled back at me. "Good morning, Alex," she murmured, pulling me towards her for a long kiss. Then another. God, how good she was. I was more than a little tempted to take off my clothes and jump back into bed with her, but I resisted. "I need to go to Los Angeles, honey," I said. "I received a few emails this morning about a meeting we were trying to organize. It all came together unexpectedly, and I need to be there for a couple of days." It was a lie, but a very plausible one. I traveled often and business trips often arose on demand. "Okay, darling, I'll warm your bed. Will you come back on Friday?" "Yes, that's what we're planning. Just make sure that only you warm the bed, okay, Gina?" She laughed hard and then hugged me tightly. "There's no one here but me, baby. Just imagine how excited I'll be by Friday," she whispered in my ear. In the limousine, I marveled at my wife's ability to lie to me. Either I was completely wrong, and she had nothing to do with the attempt on my life, or she was one hell of a skilled actress, and, moreover, a cold-blooded monster. I hoped I was wrong, but I didn't see how that could be. On the short flight from San Jose to Los Angeles, I worked out some of the details of my plan. Complete secrecy was key. Since Jeff Denham apparently was involved, I had to avoid any actions that might lead him to suspect me. And since he was the top security guy in the entire Bay Area, that meant bringing in someone from afar. On my taxi ride from the airport, I stopped at an electronics store and paid cash for a disposable cell phone. Then, after checking into the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, I called Dan Camarena and arranged to meet him for lunch not far from his downtown office. Dan was my right-hand man when I started Apex, and we both got pretty rich when it took off. 3 years earlier, we parted on amicable terms. He moved his family to Los Angeles and took a job at a financial services company that, thanks to his brains, was doing well. Dan and I saw each other a couple of times a year, so no one thought it was strange that I came to visit him. We sat over sandwiches and beer on the restaurant's outdoor terrace, reminiscing about old times and sharing stories of recent challenges and triumphs. Dan told me about his wife Linda and what their children were doing, but when we finished eating, I leaned forward and spoke more seriously. "I'd like to ask you a couple of favors, Dan, if you don't mind." He looked interested, and I continued. "I have reason to believe that I may have some kind of problem inside Apex. Do you have a security company that you trust absolutely?" I asked. He said, "Vertex Securities. Alan Newman, the guy who runs it, is first class. But you still have Jeff Denham, don't you?" "Yes, but I need someone from the outside. Here's my first request. Could you call Newman and tell him that a good friend would like to talk to him on the phone and get advice, but without saying my name?" Without hesitation, Dan called his cell phone and made an appointment with his friend for later that day. "Thank you, Dan. I will ask you to please forget that this ever happened. Now, here's another request of mine. Actually, this is a question. In the time you've known Gina, have you ever seen her act in any way inappropriate or suspicious at all?" To my surprise, Dan looked away, and his face turned red. I waited, and finally, he looked at me again with a more guilty expression than I had ever seen before. By 9:45 a.m., I was in San Diego and parked in the lot next to Asimov's office. Barry Asimov was a short, fat man in his 40s. He had a bad hairbrush and his brown suit didn't fit him very well. In short, he was a completely expressionless figure. But within 10 minutes, I realized that he was one of the smartest people I have met in a long time. I knew I had to trust someone, and I decided it would be Asimov. I got straight to the point. "Mr. Asimov, I need a security company that can do important work for me. It's outside this area, will require a lot of high-tech computer work, and is extremely confidential. I'm willing to pay very well for what I need. In addition to covering all your people's expenses, the work could take the next few weeks, and I wouldn't be surprised if your fee was in the 7 figures. For several moments, he looked at me intently. "Why did you decide to contact us, and why do you think we are suitable for this job?" "Someone recommended Alan Newman to me, and Newman spoke highly of you." "Why not just use Newman? He's very good." "Because I'm trying to cover my tracks. When we get into this, you'll understand why." I have good reason to be wary. Newman called you on my behalf, but he never knew my name, so it would be quite difficult for anyone to trace me to you. Not impossible, but difficult. We talked a little more about preliminary preparations, and then Asimov said, "Let's hear your story. If it looks like something we can handle, then we're in business." I told him everything: who I was, what Apex was doing, and what it was worth, as well as the recent attempt on my life. I told him I suspected Gina and Denham were involved, and why. I repeated Dan Cameron's story about Gina's behavior and her possible affair with Josh Daniels, although I never mentioned Cameron's name. When I finished, Asimov asked me some probing questions. He clearly knew his stuff. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I know Jeff Denham, at least by reputation. He is considered to be very smart. Many in Silicon Valley swear by his work. So if he's really doing something shady, we'll have to be very sensitive in how we go after him." We talked a little more, and finally, Asimov said, "Here's what I recommend. Essentially, you need two things. Someone needs to look very carefully at your books, internal documents, and memos, and someone else needs to check Denham, your wife, and other high-ranking people at Apex. David Karos, my best computer scientist, will handle the first task. 2 or 3 financiers who work for him will be able to analyze what they find. I'll ask Vera Anderson to assemble an observation group for the second part." For 30 minutes, the 4 of us sat in the conference room, eating takeout sandwiches and discussing my situation. Asimov, for the most part, did not interfere, allowing Karos and Anderson to ask questions, but every now and then he would put in his 2 cents, and I never ceased to be amazed at his intelligence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in good hands. By mid-afternoon, I was on my way back to Los Angeles. To my relief, Asimov understood why I could not immediately give him a large fee, and was ready to trust me on the basis of a bill prepared by a notary in his office. All the digging in Apex that Karos was going to do would be conducted through my computer, which was connected to other important computers in the company. His method was simple. He made me remember the URL of Asimov's website. Whenever I was alone in my office for 2 hours or more, I would go to this address, download and install software from this site on my computer. This software allowed Karos and his team to download and copy any files they wanted to look at from my computer and those it was connected to. Whenever I needed to leave the office, I closed the connection, logged out of the site, deleted the program from the computer, and covered my tracks in the usual way, deleting the browser history, and so on. It wasn't a completely traceless method, but only an expert who already suspected and thoroughly examined my computer would have been able to see what was going on. He calculated that in 20 hours of searching the internet, he could find and download everything he needed to understand if something was wrong at Apex. Part of Anderson's job included routine supervision of Gina and key staff members. We agreed not to put Denham under surveillance since, as a security officer, he would likely notice the attention, no matter how good Asimov's men were. Instead, she tasked people with digging through phone conversations and credit card records, making sure it was done at a safe distance so Denham wouldn't know about it. I emphasized to them that Denham was no fool. Spying on him or trying to bug his phone home or office would be a very bad idea. "I'm willing to bet he'll contact us within a day or so," Vera answered, "but I would like to install audio and video recording in your house, as well as a bug in Gina's purse and wiretapping of her mobile phone." We agreed that I would let them know when the house was empty. She promised that her team could get the job done in no more than 3 hours. The first thing they'll do is comb the house to make sure Denham hasn't already installed surveillance equipment. As for Gina's purse and phone, I gave them the address of her tennis club. Vera assured me that it would not be difficult to pick the lock of her locker, quickly check her bag and phone for bugs, and plant their own. My part of the deal was simple: go home and pretend everything was fine. Continue to live your normal life at work and at home, but at the same time, be alert. Asimov was sure that whoever tried to kill me would wait a little before making another attempt. At the very least, they will have to make sure that your Lexus is destroyed so that there is no evidence of the first attempt. And within a few days, we should have enough data to understand what's going on. So don't do anything stupid, Alex. No hiking through forests or unfamiliar places. You can even make an effort to avoid driving alone. Make an excuse for Gina to drive you to work and stuff like that. But I don't think you'll have anything to worry about right away. I smiled ironically at him. Easy for you to say, Barry, but I'll be as careful as I can. Before I left them, we developed a communication system. It had to be one-sided from me to Asimov. I continued to use discarded mobile phones. When I was free to call, I would dial the number and ask for Larry Asimov. The receptionist was tasked with correcting my mistake and then connecting my call directly to Barry. We agreed that I would try to call at least once every 2 days. Back at the Beverly Wilshire, I had dinner and then called Gina to tell her I'd be home a day early. She was animated on the phone, teasing me about how lonely and cold she was in her big bed, and I promised to keep her warm on Thursday night. When I hung up, I realized how crazy it seemed that my wife was plotting to kill me. Before all this started, I would say that I had no illusions about Gina. She was beautiful and hot, adventurous and energetic, but she was also narcissistic and a little cold. She wasn't a heartbreaker who took in stray cats. Her number one interest was Gina, and you didn't have to know her long to realize that fact. And yet, I would say that she loved me in her own way. She was not a warm, caring wife, but I was not a particularly affectionate husband. We didn't often snuggle by the fireplace or take leisurely walks along beautiful beaches, except for the occasional Caribbean vacation when we made love during the day and went out to dinner in the casino in the evening. We were both ambitious, goal-oriented people, and although Gina no longer worked, she energetically pursued the things that interested her: tennis, shopping, hanging out with friends, and spending time with me. I would say that, in her own way, Gina loved me. In fact, I would say that Gina loved me as much as she could love anyone, given her basic nature. And given my own nature, this was enough for me. I liked our life together. I was happy. But needless to say, now all these assumptions had been called into question. Although I was shocked by the idea that she might be trying to kill me, the preliminary evidence definitely pointed to it. It wasn't hard to come up with a motive. It's money. Stupid. And if what Dan Cameron told me was true, she could be connected to at least two of my assistants, Josh Daniels of Apex and my friend Jeff Denham. In other words, if all my worst suspicions were true, she was a monster, a cold-blooded, heartless evil. If she really slept with Daniels, tried to seduce Dan Cameron, and was somehow involved with Denham, this suggested that she was the driving force behind everything that was happening. I spent most of the plane ride back to San Jose thinking about how this might all end. I was confident that I could be a good enough actor to fool Gina for a while. If she was really cheating on me, it would be a challenge to see if I could do it just as well. And if by some miracle my suspicions were proven wrong, I would be more than happy to open my heart to her love again. But if she really was behind the attempt on my life, let's just say I already had some ideas about how I wanted this story to end, and part of me was looking forward to it. My reunion with Gina on Thursday night was wonderful in several ways. First of all, the night was amazing. This was almost always the case when we were apart. Whether it's love for me or pure excitement on Gina's part, I don't know, but either way, I have no complaints. She ordered Chinese food because she knows I love it, but she also greeted me wearing a short robe with nothing underneath. As I quickly discovered, I decided it would be better to spend time in the bedroom before we ate. We had an intimate moment that left us both out of breath. Then we showered together and went downstairs to have dinner. The second reason why Thursday pleased me is that there was nothing special about it. As you can imagine, I watched Gina very carefully for any sign of guilt, anxiety, or vigilance, and there was none. She was herself with the usual stories about how she beat Sharon Combs 6-4 in the third set, how she found exactly the shoes she wanted, but unfortunately in the wrong color, and so on. I was sure that she had no idea about my suspicions. When I arrived at the office on Friday, Jeff Denham had already called and said he was coming to see us. No surprise, presumably he wanted to report on the audit I asked for. Moreover, I was sure that he would want to find out why I asked for it. He would want to make sure that I was not suspicious of him. At about 10:30 a.m., Gina called me from home. "Alex, you forgot your blue shirt? I think I'll bring it to you. Shall I?" This was Gina being sweet, the perfect wife, and for a second, I felt guilty that I was spying on her, but only for a second. "No, darling, I'll be home soon. Just keep the shirt for me." We talked for a couple of minutes, and she said that she would spend the day playing tennis and probably wouldn't see me until dinner time. "Be ready, darling, I'll have to work off some calories again tonight." By noon, Denham was in my office. His face was impassive, and we shook hands, which didn't feel quite normal. We settled down with the door closed, and I decided to let him lead. He briefly told me about the audit. As expected, his people found nothing suspicious, although they recommended a few changes to tighten internal controls. When he finished, I smiled and said, "I knew we were running smoothly, but it was good to check. Thank you for coming so quickly." "No problem, Alex. But since we're friends, I hope you don't mind me asking why you're suddenly so interested in having an audit done." I smiled again and waved my hand. "Nothing much. I just heard a rumor in the valley, probably from someone trying to stir up trouble, so I thought I'd better make sure everything was fine. Just routine, really. But you know how this town is." He nodded, but his face didn't show much emotion. Sure. It's my job to make sure everything runs smoothly." We spent the next 10 minutes chatting about our wives and the vacation he and Angie were planning. Nothing was out of the ordinary, but I was happy to see him leave the office. Later that afternoon, Karos called me from a payphone. "We're connected. I've downloaded everything I need, but it will take a few hours to check the files. So call me on Monday, and I should have something for you. Have a good weekend." I was surprised that no one mentioned the car and the brake line. Either Denham decided not to risk coming back to Marshall Motors to destroy the evidence, or they would take the car to an abandoned place and burn it. In either case, I asked Dominic to keep me posted, so I decided to just wait and see what would happen. Gina was in a great mood Friday evening, not just in bed but generally. We went out to dinner, then took a long walk. After all, she's rarely been this cuddly or warm, not to mention making my life with her easy. The conversation never lagged, and I was really glad to be with her. It was hard to reconcile this gorgeous, funny woman with the facts I now knew about her. She seemed so innocent. And yet, what could be more damning than her morning phone call? At around 10 a.m. on Saturday, we were having breakfast, and I had just finished reading the Wall Street Journal when the phone rang. Gina jumped up and ran to the living room to answer it, and I listened as hard as I could. "Hello? Gina Ginopoulos." Then she laughed and kept silent for a long time. Finally, she said, "I would love to, baby, but today isn't the best day." Then there was another long silence, and finally, she said, "Yes, but I need to wait until this evening. Call me on my cell phone around 5. Okay." Another pause. "I know, darling, I miss you too." And then she hung up. I was so angry I didn't know what to do. I felt the blood rush to my face, and if Gina had come back into the kitchen at that moment, I might have slapped her, but I was able to control myself, and when she returned a few minutes later, I was ready for her. She smiled and kissed me on the forehead. "Alex, I have to go into town for a while, probably most of the afternoon, but I'll be back by dinner. I'll make it up to you tonight, darling." The last part of her remark struck me as ironic. She was going to have fun with her lover, then come home and make it up to me by screwing my brains out. But I just smiled and said, "That's okay, baby. It's a good day to play 9 holes of golf with Doug." She left half an hour later, and I waited another 20 minutes before calling Vera Anderson, letting her know that the house was now empty. Then I took my bag and left for a golf game, making sure to be away until early evening. Vera called me at about 2:30. "We're done. It took us a while to check the house, but I think we found everything." Denham had already planted 3 bugs and a video camera. My men also managed to get into her purse at the tennis club and put a bug in it, and we tapped her phone. I was satisfied, and we did all this without her noticing. "Yes, Alex, no problem. It's a pity that I can't say we could be as successful in Denham's office or home, but we'll get a lot of information from what we have." Gina returned home around 4:45 p.m. and seemed quite cheerful. She asked about my game and listened attentively, not showing the slightest sign of guilt, anxiety, or anything else. And yet, she was having an affair. The whole time we were having dinner, I kept thinking that she was making a mockery of me, or at least thought she was. But for some reason, this thought did not upset me as much as I expected. Part of me was now completely detached, watching her actions and listening to what she said as if I were watching an actress on television or in the theater. We had a pleasant, ordinary evening, and later we had very hot sex. As soon as we finished and Gina fell asleep, I quietly got out of bed, went to my office, and used a disposable cell phone to call Asimov's office. After a few minutes, Barry got on the line. "Alex, everything's fine here. I had my boys listen to the video and audio recordings of your house, and there's nothing special going on." I frowned. "Okay, do you want me to call you tomorrow?" "Yes, but try to give us some time. I know it's difficult for you, but we have to go through all the files we've downloaded, and it will take time. Be patient." "Understood, Barry, talk to you tomorrow." The next day was Sunday, so Gina and I spent time with some of her friends and had an ordinary day. It wasn't until late in the evening, after making love to Gina once again, that I realized what a high-wire act one had to maintain. The last thing I wanted to do was hurt myself. I was walking on a knife's edge, pretending that everything was fine while my life and my marriage seemed to be crumbling around me. I wasn't a soldier, a warrior, or a fighter. I was just a businessman with the skills to lead a successful company and live a comfortable life. Now I found myself playing a role that seemed completely unnatural and foreign to me, but I had no choice. If I didn't find the strength to go through with it, I would never find out the truth about what was happening. On Monday morning, Gina once again drove me to work. I had asked her to drop me off because my car wasn't ready. We left the house early, and it was only when we were halfway to the office that I realized I was nervous. I needed to be at my best. I needed to maintain my composure and not let Gina suspect that I knew anything about what was going on. We arrived at the office, and I kissed her goodbye before heading inside. I went straight to my office and called Barry Asimov. We spoke briefly, and he confirmed that there was still nothing unusual in the recordings. We've reviewed more of the files, and there's no sign of any financial wrongdoing. It's possible that whatever happened with the car is personal, not related to the business. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. What could this mean? If it wasn't about money, then what was it about? Gina had no reason to want me dead unless there was something I didn't know, something deeper and more sinister. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I attended meetings, signed papers, and kept up appearances, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about Gina and what might be happening behind my back. I needed to be careful, to gather more evidence, and to stay one step ahead. That night, Gina was as loving and attentive as ever. She cooked a delicious dinner, and we spent the evening watching a movie together. She curled up next to me on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. It was all so normal, so perfect, that it was hard to believe there was anything wrong. But I knew better. I knew I had to stay vigilant. As I lay in bed that night with Gina sleeping peacefully beside me, I couldn't help but wonder what the next few days would bring. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I was determined to find it, no matter what the cost. The next morning I woke up early, feeling more determined than ever. I had spent the night tossing and turning, replaying every interaction I'd had with Gina in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that there was something deeply wrong, something she was hiding from me. I couldn't just let this go. I had to uncover the truth. Gina was already awake and dressed when I got out of bed. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper. She looked up as I walked in and smiled warmly, as if nothing was amiss. "Good morning, darling," she said, her voice cheerful. "How did you sleep?" "Not bad," I lied, forcing a smile. "I was thinking of taking the day off. I could use a break." Gina's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of something passing over her face before she regained her composure. "That sounds wonderful, Alex. We could spend the day together, maybe go out for lunch." I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Sure. I'll just make a few calls, let the office know I won't be in today." As I headed to my office, I felt a knot of tension in my stomach. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't just sit around and pretend everything was fine. I had to take action, had to find a way to get closer to the truth. Once I was alone in my office, I picked up my disposable cell phone and dialed Barry Asimov's number. He answered on the second ring. "Alex, what's going on?" he asked, his voice calm and professional. "I've decided to take the day off," I said quietly. "Gina and I are going to spend the day together. I'll need you to keep an eye on things, make sure she doesn't suspect anything." "Understood," Barry replied. "We're still going through the recordings and files. So far, there's nothing new, but we'll keep looking." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a sense of unease settle over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that whatever Gina was planning was about to come to a head. I needed to be ready. After making a few more calls to the office, I returned to the kitchen where Gina was still sitting. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with anticipation. "So what do you want to do today?" she asked, her tone light and playful. "I was thinking we could drive out to the coast," I suggested, trying to sound casual. "Maybe have lunch at that little seafood place we like." Gina's smile widened, and she nodded eagerly. "That sounds perfect. Let me just grab my bag, and we can go." As we drove out to the coast, I couldn't help but notice how relaxed and happy Gina seemed. She chatted animatedly about the latest gossip from her tennis club, about a new boutique she wanted to visit, and about some plans she had for redecorating the house. It was all so normal, so mundane, that it almost made me forget about my suspicions. But then, as we were pulling into the parking lot of the seafood restaurant, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sitting in a car a few spaces away was a man I recognized, a man who worked for Jeff Denham. He was watching us, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, but there was no mistaking him. I forced myself to stay calm, not wanting to alert Gina. As we got out of the car, I casually glanced in the direction of the man, but he made no move to acknowledge me. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on us as we walked into the restaurant. Inside, we were seated at a table by the window, with a view of the ocean. Gina ordered a glass of wine and started talking about some new investment she was considering, but I could barely focus on what she was saying. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Was Jeff Denham spying on us? Or was he just keeping tabs on Gina? And if so, why? I excused myself to use the restroom and, once inside, pulled out my cell phone and dialed Barry's number again. "Barry, I need you to do something for me," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think Jeff Denham has someone following us. Can you check on that?" "Of course," Barry replied immediately. "I'll have someone look into it. In the meantime, be careful, Alex." I hung up and took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I couldn't let Gina see that I was rattled. I had to play it cool, had to keep up the facade until I knew more. When I returned to the table, Gina was sipping her wine and looking out at the ocean, a serene expression on her face. She turned to me as I sat down, her smile warm and genuine. "Everything okay, darling?" she asked, her voice soft. "Yeah, everything's fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just had to take care of something at work." We finished our lunch, and by the time we left the restaurant, the man in the car was gone. Gina didn't seem to notice anything unusual, and I did my best to act normal for the rest of the day. But the encounter had left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about what it meant. Back at home that evening, I received a call from Barry. "Alex, you were right," he said, his voice low. "Denham has been keeping tabs on you. My team found out that he's hired a couple of private investigators. They've been following you and Gina for a few days now." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you think he's up to?" "It's hard to say," Barry replied, "but it's clear he's getting nervous. He might suspect that you're on to him." I clenched my jaw, feeling a surge of anger. Let him suspect all he wants. I'm not going to back down. "Good," Barry said, his tone firm. "Just be careful, Alex. We're getting closer to the truth, but things might get dangerous." "I understand," I said, my voice cold. "I'll be ready." After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the wall as the pieces of the puzzle slowly started to come together in my mind. Jeff Denham was nervous because he knew I was getting close. He knew that the web he and Gina had woven was starting to unravel, and he was desperate to keep it intact. But he had underestimated me. They both had. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without a fight. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. It was time to turn the tables on Jeff Denham and Gina. If they thought they could play me for a fool, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The day started like any other. Gina was her usual cheerful self, chatting over breakfast about her plans for the day, but I was already several steps ahead. I had made a plan, and I was going to execute it flawlessly. I drove to the office, my mind focused on the task at hand. As soon as I arrived, I went straight to my desk and logged onto my computer. It was time to set things in motion. I contacted Barry first, outlining my plan. He listened carefully, then agreed to help. "I'll make the necessary arrangements," he said. "Just be careful, Alex. This could be risky." "I know," I replied, my voice steely, "but it's time to end this." By the time lunch rolled around, everything was in place. I had set a trap for Denham and Gina, and now all I had to do was wait. It wasn't long before Denham took the bait. He called me around 2 p.m., his voice tense. "Alex, we need to talk," he said, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Can you meet me at the office in an hour?" "Sure, Jeff," I replied, keeping my tone light. "I'll be there." An hour later, I walked into the office, my heart pounding in my chest. Denham was already waiting for me in the conference room, his expression serious. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I've been thinking about some things, and I wanted to clear the air." I leaned back in my chair, watching him carefully. "Go on." Denham hesitated, then sighed. "Look, I know things have been a bit tense lately. I just want you to know that you can trust me. We've been friends for a long time, Alex. I wouldn't do anything to jeopardize that." I almost laughed at the irony of his words but managed to keep a straight face. "I appreciate that, Jeff. But is there something specific you wanted to talk about?" He fidgeted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, I've heard some rumors about you looking into the company's finances. I just want to make sure there are no misunderstandings." So that's what this was about. He was fishing for information, trying to find out how much I knew, but I wasn't going to give him anything. "Rumors?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "What kind of rumors?" Denham hesitated again, then shook his head. "It's probably nothing. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page." "Of course, Jeff," I said, giving him a reassuring smile. "We're on the same page." He seemed to relax at that, and we spent the next few minutes discussing work-related matters. But as soon as the meeting was over and I left the conference room, I made a beeline for my office. I dialed Barry's number and spoke quickly. "Denham is onto us. He's trying to cover his tracks. We need to move fast." "Understood," Barry replied. "We'll finish the sweep tonight." As I hung up the phone, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The final act was about to begin, and I was ready for whatever came next. That night, I returned home to find Gina waiting for me, as usual. She greeted me with a kiss, and we settled into our usual routine, but all I could think about was how close I was to exposing her and Denham for what they were. After dinner, I excused myself and went to my office, locking the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed Barry's number one last time. "Barry, is everything ready?" I asked, my voice low. "Yes, Alex," he replied. "We've got everything we need. It's time to bring them down." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Let's do it." As the night deepened, the house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I knew that the confrontation was coming, and I needed to be ready. I spent the next few hours going over the plan in my head, making sure every detail was in place. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Around midnight, I heard Gina's soft footsteps approaching the office. She knocked gently on the door, and I quickly closed the files I was reviewing on my computer. "Alex, are you still up?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of concern. "Yeah, just finishing up some work," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I'll be in bed soon." She hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open slightly, peeking in. "You work too hard, you know that? Why don't you come to bed?" I smiled at her, though my mind was racing. "I'll be there in a bit. I just need to wrap this up." She nodded, but I could see the tension in her eyes, the slight unease that she was trying to hide. "All right, don't stay up too late." After she left, I waited a few minutes to make sure she was truly gone, then I picked up my phone and dialed Barry one last time. "Everything is set," Barry said as soon as he answered. "We have the evidence, and the authorities are ready. It's just a matter of time now. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Good, let's do it tomorrow. It's time to end this. The next day was a blur of normalcy, a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Gina acted as if everything was fine, as if our life together was as perfect as it had ever been. But I knew better. I could see the cracks in the facade, the subtle signs of her anxiety. In the late afternoon, I told Gina I had a surprise planned for us and asked her to meet me at the office after hours. She agreed, her curiosity piqued, but there was a wariness in her eyes that she couldn't completely hide. As the clock ticked closer to the appointed time, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was at the moment I had been preparing for, the moment when the truth would come out and justice would be served. Gina arrived at the office just after 6 p.m. She was dressed impeccably, as always, her makeup flawless, her hair perfectly styled, but there was a tension in her posture, a nervousness in her eyes that she tried to mask with a smile. "What's this all about, Alex?" she asked, trying to sound playful but failing to hide the edge in her voice. I gestured for her to sit down at the conference table. "Just a little something I've been working on. I think you'll find it interesting." She glanced around the empty office, her unease growing, but she sat down across from me, trying to maintain her composure. I took a deep breath, then reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I placed it on the table between us and opened it, revealing the documents and photos that Barry and his team had gathered. Gina's eyes widened as she looked at the evidence laid out before her. For a moment, she seemed too shocked to react, but then her gaze hardened, and she looked up at me with a mixture of anger and fear. "What is this, Alex?" she demanded, her voice shaking slightly. "This, Gina, is the truth," I said calmly. "The truth about you, about Jeff, and about everything you've been hiding from me." She stared at the documents, her face pale. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is all ... This is all a mistake." I leaned forward, my voice cold and unyielding. "No, Gina. The only mistake was thinking you could get away with it." For a moment, she seemed on the verge of breaking down, but then she pulled herself together, her eyes flashing with defiance. "You have no proof. None of this will hold up in court." I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "Oh, but I do have proof, Gina. More than enough to bring you and Jeff down. The authorities already have everything they need. It's over." Gina's face twisted in anger and fear, but before she could say anything else, the door to the conference room opened, and Barry walked in, followed by 2 police officers. Gina's eyes darted between them, panic setting in. "Miss McMillan," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and attempted murder. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." Gina recoiled, her eyes wild with fear. "Alex, you can't do this. You can't let them take me." I stood up, my expression cold and detached. "You did this to yourself, Gina, you and Jeff. Now you have to face the consequences." The officers moved forward, taking Gina by the arms and pulling her to her feet. She struggled for a moment, but they quickly secured her hands in cuffs. As they led her towards the door, she looked back at me, her eyes filled with desperation. "Alex, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can still fix this." I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. "It's too late for that, Gina. Goodbye." As the door closed behind her, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering anger. But above all, I felt a sense of closure. It was over. The nightmare that Gina and Jeff had created was finally over. Barry stepped up beside me, his expression grim but satisfied. "You did the right thing, Alex. It was the only way." I nodded, though the weight of what had just happened was still sinking in. "I know. It had to be done." Barry patted my shoulder. "Go home, get some rest. It's been a long road, but you made it." I watched as he left, the silence of the empty office surrounding me. It was done. Gina was gone, and soon Jeff would follow. The nightmare was finally over. But as I stood there, alone in the dimly lit conference room, I realized that the scars of this ordeal would linger for a long time. I had won, but the cost had been high, and now I had to figure out how to move on, how to rebuild my life from the ashes of betrayal. As the police car carrying Gina pulled away from the building, I stood there, staring at the spot where she had been. The weight of everything that had transpired pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. The cold, calculated moves I had made to protect myself and bring her down were necessary, but they had taken a toll on me that I hadn't anticipated. The office was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that felt almost suffocating. I had spent the last few months consumed by this, and now that it was over, I was left with a void I didn't know how to fill. My life had been shattered, not just by Gina's betrayal, but by the lengths I had gone to ensure her downfall. I walked back into my office, closing the door behind me. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself bore witness to all the deceit and manipulation that had occurred within these walls. I sat down at my desk, staring at the computer screen, but my mind was elsewhere, reliving every painful detail of the last few months. There was a knock on the door, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Meredith, looking concerned as she stepped inside. "Alex," she began softly, "I just wanted to check on you. I know this has been a lot." I managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Meredith. I'm fine. Just trying to process everything." She nodded, understanding. "If there's anything you need, anything at all, just let me know." "Actually," I said, my voice steadying, "there is one thing. Can you cancel my meetings for the rest of the week? I think I need some time." "Of course, Alex. I'll take care of it," she replied, her tone gentle. She paused for a moment, then added, "You did the right thing. Don't let yourself forget that." "I know," I said, though I wasn't sure if I truly believed it. "Thanks, Meredith." She left quietly, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes and letting out a long, deep breath. The right thing. It was what everyone kept telling me, but it didn't make the pain any less real. I spent the next few days in a kind of haze, going through the motions of life but feeling detached from it all. The media frenzy around Gina and Jeff's arrest was relentless, with headlines splashing their names across every major news outlet. Apex was thrust into the spotlight, just as Nancy had predicted, but I found little solace in the attention. My personal life had become fodder for public consumption, and I hated it. Nancy was a constant presence during those days, guiding the company through the media storm and helping me navigate the aftermath. She was professional and composed, always knowing exactly what to say and how to handle the situation, but even she couldn't shield me from the internal turmoil I was facing. One evening, after another long day of meetings and media appearances, Nancy and I found ourselves alone in my office. The city lights glowed faintly through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. "Alex," she said, breaking the silence, "you've been through hell and back. I can't imagine what this has done to you." I looked at her, the concern in her eyes clear. "It's been hard," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly, "but I guess I always knew it would be." She nodded, understanding. "You've handled it better than most people would. You should be proud of that." "I don't feel proud," I confessed. "I feel empty, like I've lost something I can never get back." Nancy moved closer, sitting on the edge of my desk. "You've lost a lot, Alex, and it's going to take time to heal from that. But you haven't lost everything. You still have the company, your friends, and your future. You're stronger than you think." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I just don't know how to move on from this, Nancy. How do I rebuild my life after everything that's happened?" She reached out, placing a hand on my arm. "One step at a time. You don't have to figure it all out right now. Just take it day by day, and eventually you'll find your way." Her words were comforting, and for the first time in days I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could find a way to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken. "Thank you," I said quietly, meeting her gaze. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Nancy smiled, a warmth in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "You don't have to do it alone, Alex. I'm here for you, whatever you need." There was something in the way she said it, something that made me realize just how much she had been there for me, not just professionally, but personally. She had seen me at my lowest, had helped me navigate the darkest period of my life, and still she stood by me. "Nancy," I began, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't sure what I was trying to say, but the emotion behind it was undeniable. She seemed to understand, because she simply smiled and squeezed my arm gently. "We'll get through this together, Alex." In that moment, I knew that she was right. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Nancy by my side, I had a chance to rebuild, to heal, and maybe, just maybe, to find happiness again. The media frenzy eventually died down, as it always does, and life at Apex began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Gina and Jeff's trial loomed on the horizon, a final chapter in the saga that had appended my life. But for now, I focused on the present, on taking those small steps forward that Nancy had encouraged. One evening, after a long day at the office, Nancy and I found ourselves alone once again, this time at her place. We had shared a simple dinner, the conversation light and easy, a welcome reprieve from the stress of the past months. As we sat on the couch, sipping wine, the atmosphere shifted slightly, a comfortable silence settling between us. I looked at her, seeing not just the colleague who had helped save my company, but the woman who had been my rock through it all. "Nancy," I said softly, breaking the silence, "I don't think I've ever properly thanked you for everything you've done. You've been there for me in ways I never expected, and I don't know how I can ever repay you." She turned to me, her eyes softening. "You don't have to repay me, Alex. I did it because I care about you. I always have." There was a sincerity in her voice that touched me deeply, and I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. "I care about you too, Nancy. More than I realized." The words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, we just looked at each other, the unspoken feelings finally coming to the surface. Nancy reached out, her hand resting on mine. "Alex, we've been through a lot together, And I know you're still healing, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, not just as a friend or a colleague, but as someone who cares about you deeply." My heart skipped a beat at her words, and I felt a warmth spread through me, a sense of connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. "Nancy, I think I've been trying to ignore how I feel about you because of everything that's happened, but I can't deny it anymore. You've been my anchor through all of this, and I think I'm falling for you." Her eyes softened, and she smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "We don't have to rush into anything, Alex. We can take it slow, see where this goes. But I'm falling for you too." The weight of the past months seemed to lift in that moment, replaced by a tentative hope for the future. I leaned in, closing the distance between us, and she met me halfway, our lips meeting in a soft, tender kiss. It wasn't just a kiss of passion, but one of comfort, of connection, of two people finding solace in each other after weathering the storm. It was the beginning of something new, something that felt right, something that I hadn't realized I needed until now. As we pulled back, Nancy rested her forehead against mine, her eyes closed, a contented smile on her lips. "We'll take it one step at a time," she whispered. I nodded, feeling a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. "One step at a time," I agreed. And with that, I knew that while the road ahead might still be uncertain, I wasn't walking it alone. Nancy and I would face whatever came next together, and that was enough. The darkness of the past was finally beginning to recede, and in its place, a new dawn was breaking, one filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a better future.